By 1910, the dream of flight was spreading across Europe like wildfire. From Paris to Budapest, daring young men were building fragile machines of wood and fabric, determined to prove that the skies could belong to humanity. Among them was a Hungarian pioneer full of ambition, courage, and national pride. On a spring day in May, he took his seat in a machine that symbolized progress, hope, and the future. The crowd gathered with awe as the fragile craft lifted into the air. But within moments, that dream turned into horror. The airplane faltered, control was lost, and the machine crashed to the ground, claiming yet another life. This was the world's fourth fatal crash, proof that every step forward in aviation came at the highest cost. Fourth airplane crashed. Hungary, 1910. In the early years of the 20th century, the sky was a frontier as dangerous as it was beautiful. Every month brought new machines, new designs, and new names stepping forward to claim their place in history. Across Europe, aviation fever had taken hold. In France, crowds cheered pioneers like Louis Blériot and Henri Farman. In Britain, new clubs and competitions sprang up almost overnight. And in Hungary, a small but determined circle of enthusiasts began to dream of their own place among the nations of flight. One of those dreamers was a young aviator whose name history has almost forgotten. He was no soldier like Lieutenant Selfridge, no test pilot like Eugène Lefebvre, and no national celebrity like Léon Delagrange. He was instead a man driven by ambition and pride, eager to prove that Hungary, too, could produce men who dared to touch the sky. His machine, like so many of that era, was fragile, stitched together from wood, wire, and canvas. To modern eyes, it looked more like a toy than a vehicle, but in 1910, it represented the cutting edge of possibility. Every nut and bolt, every stretched surface of fabric, every delicate spar carried the weight of hope. The spring of 1910 was alive with excitement. Aviation meets were becoming social events, drawing spectators who came not only to marvel, but to boast of the daring men who flew above their hometowns. That May, in Hungary, such a demonstration was prepared. The young aviator, Sándor Korda, as later records would identify him, was set to pilot his fragile machine before a crowd eager to see the marvel of powered flight. For most in attendance, this was not just a spectacle, but a moment of national pride. Hungary, still part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, wanted to show that it too could stand shoulder to shoulder with France and America in the age of invention. The airfield was little more than a flat stretch of land, marked by temporary barriers and surrounded by expectant faces. Families, journalists, and curious onlookers gathered, their eyes fixed on the peculiar craft resting on its wheels. Children pointed at the strange bird-like machine, while older men muttered about both its wonder and its danger. For the pilot, there was no fear visible. These were the days when courage was a currency as necessary as money, and aviators spent it lavishly. He climbed into the cockpit, if such a word could be used, for what was little more than a wooden seat perched between wires. There were no instruments, no gauges to measure altitude or speed, no radio to call for help. He relied solely on his hands, his instincts, and the fragile heartbeat of the engine before him. As assistants steadied the wings, the propeller was spun by hand. The engine sputtered, coughed, then roared to life. The machine shivered, eager to leap forward. The crowd pressed closer, their excitement mixed with apprehension. With a wave of the pilot's hand, The assistants released their grip. The small craft jolted forward, bumping across the uneven ground. For a moment, it seemed doubtful that it would ever leave the earth, but then the wings caught the air, and the machine lifted. Cheers erupted as the pilot climbed steadily upward. In that moment, all the risks were forgotten. The sight of a man soaring above the ground, suspended between earth and heaven, was too astonishing to be tempered by caution. The machine circled, climbing to perhaps 50 feet. Its wings flexed, straining against the invisible currents of the air. The pilot leaned gently, guiding it in a wide arc. For a minute or two, everything seemed steady, even graceful. The crowd applauded, children shouted, and journalists scribbled hurried notes. Hungary, it seemed, had taken to the sky. Then, suddenly, the fragile illusion shattered. A sound, a snap, sharp and cruel, echoed across the field. The crowd gasped as they saw the right wing sag unnaturally, its fabric flapping like a wounded bird. The machine lurched, losing its balance. The pilot fought for control, but the primitive controls gave him little to work with. The nose dipped, the machine tilted, and in an instant the applause turned into horrified silence. The aircraft plummeted toward the ground. With no altitude to recover, no parachute to save him, the pilot's fate was sealed. The machine struck the earth with a sickening crash, shattering into a mess of splinters and torn canvas. Dust rose, mingling with the cries of the crowd. Men rushed forward, but there was nothing to be done. The pilot had been killed instantly. Shock rippled through the onlookers. Some wept openly, others stood in stunned silence. Just moments earlier, they had watched with pride as one of their own defied gravity. Now, they stared at the broken wreckage, confronted with the brutal reality that flight was not only miraculous, but merciless. News of the crash spread quickly. Across Hungary and beyond, newspapers carried the story of the nation's first aviation fatality. For the aviation community, still reeling from the deaths of Selfridge, Lefebvre, and Delagrange, it was another painful reminder of the cost of progress. 4 men in less than 2 years had paid with their lives. Yet even as critics questioned the wisdom of such reckless experiments, others saw in these tragedies not failure, but sacrifice. Every crash, they argued, revealed flaws to be corrected. Every fallen pilot pushed engineers to build stronger wings, sturdier frames, more reliable engines. If humanity was to conquer the skies, it could only be done by walking through the fire of loss. For Hungary, the death of its pioneer was bittersweet. It was a tragedy, yes, but also a symbol. The nation had entered the brotherhood of flight, not only in triumph, but in tragedy. Its sons, like those of France and America, had proven their willingness to take risks for the dream of aviation. The crash was mourned, but it was also remembered as a beginning. In the years that followed, aviation in Hungary did not die. New inventors, engineers, and pilots stepped forward. They built on the lessons learned that day, improving materials, strengthening designs, and refusing to let fear ground them. The sacrifice of one became the inspiration of many. Looking back now, more than a century later, it is easy to dismiss these early crashes as inevitable accidents of primitive machines. But to those who lived them, they were personal, visceral, heartbreaking losses. Each pilot had a face, a family, a story. Each one climbed into a fragile machine, knowing the risks, yet believing that the dream was worth it. The fourth crash in aviation history, like the 3 before it, stands as a testament to that belief. It reminds us that progress is not smooth nor free. It is jagged, painful, and costly. But without those sacrifices, without those who dared and fell, the miracle of flight would never have become an everyday reality. When we step onto an airplane today, confident that we will land safely on the other side of the world, we do so on the shoulders of men like the Hungarian pioneer who fell in May 1910. His name may not be as famous as the Wrights or Blériot, but his courage was no less. He gave his life for a dream that belonged not to one nation, but to all of humanity. And so his story, though marked by tragedy, is not one of failure. It is one of contribution, silent, uncelebrated, but essential. The wreckage of his machine may have been swept away long ago, but its meaning endures. Aviation's black box does not record only the technical details of crashes. It records the spirit of those who dared. The fourth fatal crash was not the end of the dream of flight. It was part of its beginning. On that spring day of 1910, the fragile Hungarian machine broke apart, and with it, another life was lost in the pursuit of flight. He was not as famous as the Wrights or Blériot, yet his courage was no less, for he dared to rise when the sky was still unforgiving. His fall marked the fourth fatal crash in aviation history, a reminder that every dream has its price. But from that sacrifice, aviation in Hungary and across the world would not stop. It would rebuild, redesign, and rise again. Every safe landing today carries within it the memory of those who were never able to return. Their names may fade, their faces may be forgotten, but their courage is written in the very wings that carry us across oceans. This was not just a crash. It was a step on the long and painful path to conquering the sky. And, no matter how many times it fell, aviation always found a way to rise